But let's go ahead and move on to the next piece. Let's put this up on the screen of what is set to unfold. You are having people receive flyers now in the south of Gaza. Israeli army dropping flyers instructing Khan Yunis residents now to evacuate to known shelters, citing Hamas presence in the area. Thousands of displaced Palestinians, of course, sought shelter in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza after Israel told them to evacuate the north. So they have, already basically completely destroyed Gaza City. They blew up the parliament building there as well. There was some pretty dramatic footage of that as well. And now they're dropping flyers in the south. Now, the south has never been immune from this bombing campaign. By the way, it has been, more intense and more aggressive and more widespread in the north. But the south has not been spared whatsoever. So what this seems to indicate, Saagar, is that they're moving on to southern Gaza and that the scale of attacks and scale of the bombing campaign in southern Gaza is likely to ramp up.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well, is that they are, and look, remember, the Khan Yunis area is one that they've also claimed has also been one with a massive tunnel network. We have some maps, actually. We can put this up there on the screen, which is quite useful. This is from the Financial Times. They always do an excellent job. For those who are watching, you can see that the blue areas show an Israeli ground operation and the overall Israeli incursion. So you can see that the city of Gaza, Gaza City, is entirely surrounded. The Khan Yunis area, let's go ahead and put the next one up there, please, on the screen, because this shows you where the next phase of the fight could come, has had hundreds of targets that have actually been hit by Israeli airstrikes. And the problem is that it's also below the demarcation zone of where they had told people to flee. And if they're going to tell people to flee from Khan Yunis, it basically leaves around 2-something million people to squeeze in that tiny area between the Rafah crossing and between the overall southern area. And that's obviously going to be incredibly difficult logistically. And that really could open up a new phase, I think, of the overall operation, is if they decide to go into this, if they continue with the same level of bombing, but also if they continue with the same ground operation. I still have a lot of questions around what they're actually doing. So the number of IDF KIA is officially around 52. And that level of casualties is not genuinely consistent with clearing tunnels, with firefights, and with any of that. And so it really does raise the question around, like, what are the genuine military objectives that are being accomplished by these guys who are on the ground? What's actually happening? And I actually think this hospital, Krystal, could be a big turning point, because it could push the U.S., I think, over the edge, or the international community, if there is an intelligence failure. Again, this is a big if. We still don't know what the major evidence and all of that is. But if it is a big intelligence failure, it could then lead to a rug pull for the Western support at this point, which is already shaky at best.
Yeah.
In terms of how the U.S. and the overall rest of the West is approaching this conflict.
Put A8 up on the screen, guys, because this was a first. There was the U.S. actually allowed. They didn't veto it. They just abstained. They allowed the UN Security Council to pass a resolution calling for pauses in the fighting in Gaza. That's different than a ceasefire. But as Barak Ravid points out here, this is the first time the UN Security Council adopts any resolution on the war. And I mean, to me, in terms of what their goals are here, to me, it's not a mystery based on the statements of Israeli officials, based on the one I just told you about from the IDF spokesperson, based on the plans that were leaked strategically from an official Israeli government ministry that said, no, what our ideal situation is we push everybody, displace everyone from the north, then we push everybody out of the south, and we basically force Egypt and other Arab nations to take in this Palestinian population. This is something that members of the Netanyahu coalition have wanted for quite some time and have been openly advocating for really for years. So it shouldn't be any surprise that this is the goal, that the goal is complete ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip. And there were reports about how pressure is being put on Egypt to use their considerable debt load to try to pressure them into this. There were also reports that there's pressure being put on the U.S. to take in Palestinian refugees as well. But, to me, it's very clear what the goal is. The only question is whether they'll really be able to accomplish this goal. But I just think it's important to keep in mind where we already are in this conflict, which is for Gaza City was incredibly densely populated. This is where the majority of the population of Gaza lived, and it's gone. I mean, 45% of all homes within all of the Gaza Strip, not just in Gaza City, have already been damaged or destroyed. The people the millions who have been displaced from their homes, like there's nothing for them to go back to in Gaza City. That's already where we are. So, are they degrading Hamas capabilities? I don't know. We haven't really seen much evidence of that.
House, yeah.
But I mean, we haven't seen much evidence of like really going directly and targeting the military infrastructure. And then there's also the question that Elon Musk asked and that the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff asked as well, which is how many new Hamas members are you creating with these actions, which is part of, the lesson we should have taken from our actions in responding to 9/11. So for me, it's not really a mystery what their goals are, what their approach is. You can see it in what they're telling, their own population, what they're saying publicly, and the military actions that are unfolding on the ground.
Well, I mean, is that the goal of the Israeli far right? Yeah. Is it the overall goal of the Israeli military? I don't know. Like I said,
well, the Israeli military is just doing what they are told.
Well, the quote you read, I actually think was quite accurate, is that they're going for damage, not accuracy. Yeah, but that's kind of what I'm saying, is that they're basically willing to pull the trigger on a 15, 20% chance. That's just not something the way most Western militaries would act. That's a different thing, though, than a targeted, like, we're going to blow as much civilians up as possible. I don't really think that's what they're doing. I think it's more in terms of they just don't care as much about collateral damage. But there's an important difference between those two things.
But at what point do we go beyond quote unquote collateral damage when somewhere around 90% of the deaths are civilian? Mm-hmm. At what point does, listen, people can lie about their intent, but the numbers don't lie. 40% of the deaths are children. So at what point do you say, like, this isn't collateral damage, this is part of the goal of the operation as evidenced by what has unfolded thus far?
Well, that's what I'm saying, though, is that they just don't care about that number, and they would care and point to the one figure. I'm not justifying this. I'm only saying that the intent matters, and what it all looks like, it eventually is. So I don't know
that the intent does matter at a certain point when you have this level of civilian death and targeting of civilian infrastructure.
The intent matters in terms of what the goal is and what they're willing to. So let's say that their red line was ethnic cleansing. They're like, this is our full-blown goal. Then that's not what you would do. You would do something different. Now, it can be a secondary goal. It could be one of those things that it would be nice. It would fulfill some political, objective. But that's not the way you would conduct that is what they did in between Azerbaijan and Armenia. That's what an actual full-blown ethnic cleansing was going to look like. They
laid out exactly what the goal was, and they have the phase-by-phase process. First, move people out of the north, then put pressure on the south.
But this is a secret plan. We don't know if it's been.
That's exactly what is unfolded thus far.
And then you
put off the table any other solution. So, for example, the U.S., which there's a lot of problems with this idea too. It's like, hey, let's have the Palestinian Authority run the Gaza Strip afterwards. No, that's not going to work for us. Which is no surprise because number one, I think Palestinian Authority probably isn't up to the task. But number two, they don't want unity between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And then when you couple what's already unfolding in Gaza with what's being done in the West Bank with settlers being turned loose and basically running wild, massacring Palestinians there as well and pushing them off their land too, it's very hard for me not to look at the facts as they're unfolding and say, yeah, this is the goal. This is the plan that is unfolding. This is what they're pushing towards. And the only question is whether anyone's going to stand in their way.
Well, I think you think that because you have I think that you're coming at it from a place of zero trust from Israel. I wouldn't say I have zero. Let's call it, I don't know. I have a neutral trust of both Hamas and of Israel. I'm not willing to assume the worst of really anyone except for the Hamas terrorists, but specifically not the PA. So ethnic cleansing or genocide is one where you have an explicit aim of wiping out this entire race or pushing them out of the region. Now, is that existing in a document, which we covered here on the show? Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Is that the official plan? I don't know. There are all kinds of secret plans inside the Pentagon. There were plans inside the Pentagon to break Iraq into three parts. There was actually very seriously considered at one point pushed by Vice President Joe Biden. Does that mean it was the actual plan of the U.S. government? Not really. I actually don't think there is a plan. I think there are disparate elements within the Israeli government, some of whom want ethnic cleansing, some of them who have no problem with collateral damage, some of whom are probably much more Western aligned and are ashamed of the way that the entire operation goes. And this is like what the consensus view is. So seems to me like it's much more like of a cluster rather than any explicit aim. Now, that doesn't justify what all of the deaths are, but it comes to how are we going to, as the United States, the international community, Israel, all of us, what does this all end up look like? I think it probably ends whenever the international community just rug pulls its support. There will be no, final determination on Hamas. There will just be a high death toll. There will be now a huge squabble over internal security, indefinite, and all of that. And I think it's more, in my opinion, it's more terrifying that there isn't a plan, that there isn't a consensus plan.
So
I don't think that there is a plan.
You're right, I don't trust Israel, but actually in this, I'm taking them at their word. When you have security minister, security cabinet member, and minister Avi Dichter of the Likud party, Netanyahu's party, announcing the plan for residents of Gaza is Gaza Nakba 2023, that's how it'll end. When you have Bezalel Smotrich calling for the, quote, voluntary migration of Gaza Arabs to the countries of the world. When you have Netanyahu himself comparing Palestinians to the biblical foe of the Jewish people, Amalek, who they are called to destroy, including women and children. I'm taking them at their word of what they actually want to do here, and as evidenced by their actions thus far, which are entirely consistent with pushing the population out of Gaza entirely. Now, again, does that mean they will succeed? Not necessarily. It depends on whether the U.S. decides that we are going to, accept this quote unquote final solution, and I do use those words very intentionally, of the population in the Gaza Strip, or whether we are going to step in and use the considerable leverage that we have. But I'm just looking at their actual statements and their actions on the ground.
Yeah, I agree, Krystal, but the person that you read is a freaking agricultural. That's like saying Tom Vilsack's opinion on Israel matters. Like, who is
He's a member of the security cabinet.
Yes, but I mean, technically, Tom Vilsack is a member of the U.S. cabinet.
Well,
so
do you want to take,
I can say
the president of Israel saying there are no innocent civilians?
Yes, that's much more important.
You want to take Netanyahu himself, again, comparing them to Amalek, the historical foe of the Jewish people, and calling for them to be completely wiped out, including women, children, and infants.
So I agree. I think that the president of Israel, who, by the way, is the head of state and actually has no power, but that's a secondary thing. It's still important for the head of state for what the statements and all that. His statements, Netanyahu's statements, and the security minister's or the defense minister's statements are the single most important. We would recognize that in the U.S. system. Now, none of them have said anything like that. That said, that doesn't mean it's not problematic and that there isn't any real internal policing going on. So I'm just saying, I think we should all be super reluctant to just throw these terms out there. When you can have terrible net effects, but actual intent matters a lot in terms of how things are going to end up. And I think people are probably reading this as covering for the Israelis. Again, the effect matters the most to the families and the people who are dead.
Right.
That's actually what matters the most.
Correct.
However, from an international relations and geopolitics perspective, what their intent is and how we can actually shape the situation to our benefit and not what their real aims are, that matters in terms of how we lessen the security implications on us and also what they want, what their future is. Netanyahu is not going to be there forever. So if that was the explicit aim, is that the official aim of the entire Israeli security cabinet? Is that the aim of what the general consensus is of the Israeli population? I genuinely would say no. And so I think part of the issue is that you have a lot of disparate coalitions inside Israel right now. They had to have most of them don't even know what they want. Even the hostage thing. I mean, hostages really remains the single uniting thing probably within Israeli society. Well, I would say then it's what actions are actually being taken to release the hostages? I always find that a bit odd in terms of the discourse, because it's some things are very incongruent with releasing hostages or not, ceasefire deals, diplomacy, etc. When that falls apart, now what? So I think we're in the worst situation. I think it's very much like Iraq. There were a lot of different people who wanted to invade Iraq for various different reasons: democracy promotion, security, all kinds of other nonsense profits, on cases. And what ended up happening is that because there was no real overall security aim with that, the day after it became a cluster, and we ended up staying there for 20 years. I think very likely that's the same scenario that's going to happen for Israel. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the overall intent. That doesn't also mean that it's not horrible to be Palestinian and to live into Gaza right now.
So even if you want to say that it's unclear what the intent is at this point, it's too late. By the time it's already happened and you say oh, I guess they really did want to do the ethnic cleansing that they've been telling us all this time that they wanted to do, then it's too late. That's why it's important to look at the words and the actions that are being taken now. And again, Saagar, you already have about 2 million people who are displaced
Yes,
in Gaza,
but at least they're
forcibly
alive.
displaced.
That's my.
in
I'm
Gaza.
happy they're alive.
And 90% roughly civilian casualty toll. You already have Palestinians being aggressively pushed off of their land in the West Bank, aided and abetted by the IDF. So, I think part of this is thinking clearly about what has this government said in the past they want to do? What are the plans that they have, strategically leaked to the public? What are their comments now? And what are the actions that we see? Unless we want to, look back and say, whoops, we aided and abetted an ethnic cleansing, didn't really mean to, thought they intended something different. I guess it's too late now.
Yeah, look, I think that the dangers of it being ethnic cleansing are very real. I think it's very possible also within the current security cabinet. But for now, 2 million of them are alive. We have a chance, I think, in order to try and draw the operation to a close, have some sort of security thing which the Israelis can accept, and then get the hostages out and actually move to a situation where these people can, at the very least, return, to where they were from, and with the international support and hopefully Israel paying the bill, not America, they can actually stay, and then possibly we can all move forward. Now, that's what I would like to see. Whether the Israelis want to see that, I don't think so. Whether Hamas actually wants that either, it's not like this hasn't been a very beneficial situation to them. I think that's very, very much true. The Arab world and the international community, I think that we're much nearer to a deciding point away from the current situation than we were before. And I think that could be a beneficial direction that we would move in, especially with whatever happens with this hospital. That's really what I think.
1 in 200, at least, residents of Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza, have already been killed. And I don't know if we're still doing like the 9/11 math.
No, we need to put a total and complete shutdown on 9/11
I don't have any
math.
idea how many 9/11s that equates to, but I just want people to sit and think what that would mean. 1 in 200 residents of the Gaza Strip have already been killed. That's where we're at in this operation right now.
So I think that would be, my back of the napkin math is a couple 100,000 Americans, but I'm not 100% sure. Again, though, I am calling for a shutdown on all
9/11 math. I'm gonna calculate it, I'll have it here.
Okay.
I'm sure people will be super annoyed with me, but whatever. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right, we're subscriber funded, we're building something new, we want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.